In this video I'll be talking about my first impressions of my new table saw, the Axminster AT254SB. I think this was previously known as the AW10BSB2. First, just for full disclosure, I paid for the saw with my own money, but it was made available to me by Axminster at a discounted rate in exchange for me reviewing it on my channel. Choosing the saw wasn't easy, and I've already uploaded a separate video all about my decision-making process for choosing the right saw for me, narrowing it down from 9 options to 1. Prior to the saw arriving, I needed to make arrangements to have my electrical supply to the workshop upgraded to include a 16 amp single phase socket to power the saw, as it doesn't run on a conventional socket. Getting a new tool is always really exciting, and I could barely sleep the night before it was due to arrive. Delivery was smooth and efficient, and I was well happy that the Axminster delivery man was able to wheel it right into the workshop, as this saw weighs about 184 kilograms. I'm not going to bore you with the full assembly process, but I will tell you that it took me between 4 and 5 hours to fully assemble everything to the point where I could switch it on and use it, so it took a fair amount of time. It arrives with the cast iron table upside down to allow you to fit the cabinet legs and panels, and then flip the whole thing over. Flipping the saw over should really be done with 2 people, but I was on my own, so I used some blocks of wood to help lift it up off the pallet to a point where I could slowly and carefully tip it over onto its feet. All the metal components were coated in a protective grease, so I used some white spirit to wipe everything clean, and then I coated the cast iron with a machine wax and buffed it out nice and smooth. I found one issue during assembly of the saw, and here's the footage of that. Okay, so I found my first problem. I'm trying to fit these hand wheels, and the manual says to locate and insert a square key into that area there, so that as the handle twists, the mechanism twists as well. But I don't have those square keys. I've looked everywhere and they're not here. So now I'm wondering if I can use a big nail as a key, because that seems to make it turn quite nicely. So I think I'm going to give Axminster a call and see if they can send me out the square parts, but for the time being I'm going to cut a piece of this nail to use. After speaking with Axminster customer services on the phone, they immediately arranged for the missing square keys to be posted out to me, and they arrived a few days later so I could install them. I really like how these handles on the hand wheels are collapsible, a clever design which might stop them getting knocked accidentally, that is if I remember to fold them in anyway. The main body of the wheels are metal and the handles are plastic. The insert plate on this saw is secured to the table using some small machine screws. This doesn't bother me too much, but I mentioned it because I know that it bothers some. It doesn't take long to remove them at all. The threads are really short, although I do worry about losing the screws, and there's a very real possibility that one of these screws is going to fall down into the blade housing at some point in future, which is at best annoying and at worst potentially dangerous. It's definitely not the best design, but it's certainly secure, so that's one thing it has going for it. I'll probably end up making a zero clearance insert for this to replace the aluminium one supplied with the saw anyway, and maybe I can come up with a better way of fitting it to the saw securely without the need for screws. One of the very first things I did was to check the cast iron tables for flatness. So there is a slight hollow in the centre of the table. I'm just going to see if I can get a sheet of paper underneath, and I can. I can only just fit the piece of paper through, and this piece of paper measures 0.12 millimeters. So I would say there's probably between 0.1 and 0.2 of a millimeter of a hollow in the center of the table at the back. Again, there's another hollow in the middle here between 0.1 and 0.2 millimeters. And the front of the table here is perfectly flat. I can't get a sheet of paper in anywhere there. Now I'll try the same again in this direction. Perfectly flat there. Again, perfectly flat in the middle. And on the left hand side, perfectly flat. So it's pretty much perfect in this direction. There's a slight hollow in this direction in the middle of the table. I'm generally pretty happy with that. It's within tolerance as far as I'm concerned. Next I checked the alignment of the blade to the table, and to do that I unplug the saw, raise the blade as high as possible and make a mark on one of the teeth to use as my reference. Then I set my combination square into the edge of the mitre slot until the rule is just touching the tooth. And then I can rotate the blade and check the distance at the back to see if there was the same amount of resistance on the tooth. And to my eye, it was perfect right out of the box. Fitting the supplied riving knife is simple. Just loosen 2 bolts and slide the knife in and tighten it down. The alignment of the riving knife with the blade was absolutely perfect, and the manual actually makes reference to it having been set up at the factory ready for use, which is great. It is possible to adjust the alignment of it though, should the need arise in future. The riving knife sits a little above the height of the blade, meaning that cutting rebates or housing grooves or kerf cuts that don't cut all of the way through the board is not possible with it fitted, so to make those cuts it needs to be removed and reinstalled afterwards. A height adjustable riving knife mechanism would have been a huge improvement here in my opinion, but it is what it is. The crown guard attaches to the riving knife quickly and easily via a clamping lever. So a quick update, I ended up buying another riving knife from Axminster to see if I could have a go at cutting it down in height. This is what I ended up with, so this is the original knife and this is the one I adjusted. I just cut the top off with an angle grinder, drilled a hole and filed away this part to form a new slot for the crown guard to attach to, and I spray painted it gold just because that's what I had on hand. Now I can't recommend that anyone else does the same for safety reasons, but I have to say the newly modified knife works just as well as the original, and now I can cut slots or make resawing cuts that don't cut all of the way through the board just by removing the crown guard without having to remove the riving knife. So I'm really happy about that, and this is the riving knife I'll be using from now on. The riving knife measures 2.5mm thick, which was a huge relief for me because I wanted to be able to use my existing and favourite table saw blades on this saw. Those saw blades have a kerf of 2.8mm, which is wider than the riving knife, which is a great thing because that means I can use them. The kerf of the Axminster Excalibur blade supplied with the saw is a lot thicker at around 3.25mm. While I'm on the subject of blades, the Arbour on this saw is not able to take a dado stack. I'm mentioning that mainly because I know it'll get asked. That doesn't bother me, even if it did take a dado stack, I wouldn't use one. For dust extraction, there are 2 hoses supplied, one for the crown guard designed to pick up any dust above the table, which can be placed onto this hook that attaches to the rear fence rail and then goes down to the main dust port on the back of the saw. The other I added before flipping the saw over, and that goes from the blade housing to the same port. The port measures 97mm in external diameter, and fortunately I already had some 100mm hose that I could use to connect it up to my dust extraction system. My system mainly consists of 68mm PVC downpipe. I have another video all about setting that up on my channel, which I'll link to in the description box below if you're interested. Dust extraction on this saw for me is definitely the biggest disappointment, so I thought I should talk about my findings so far and the way I've found to improve it. I started by simply connecting it up to my system, which has a twin motor NVD750 vacuum extractor at the heart of it, a cyclone, PVC ducts and blast gates to isolate each machine. The results were really disappointing. I was getting lots of dust on the surface of the saw while making cuts, loads of dust in the air, which I measured using my air quality monitor, and huge amounts of dust underneath the saw. Then I tried putting a bung on the top port and just extracting from the cabinet without the suction from the crown guard, and it did a better job at picking up dust from the blade housing, but the amount of tabletop and airborne dust was awful. The best solution I've come up with so far is to hook up my dust extraction system directly to the crown guard only to concentrate all the suction there. And I added the bung again to the top of the port and connected up a separate chip extractor to the back port. And that works fine as a temporary solution, but it's not ideal, mainly because the chip extractor is really noisy, and also it's not an M-class extractor. And after speaking with the Axminster support team, they've recommended the use of an HVLP extractor as opposed to my LVHP vacuum, as HVLP extractors provide better airflow, and this table saw requires 1000 cubic meters per hour. That means I'm now going to have to buy a new extractor, which is something that I don't really have a convenient space for, and I didn't have the budget for either, so that's a bit annoying. But I actually really like having the crown guard attached directly to my normal ducted system, as not only is the suction really impressive, but also it keeps the hose up and out of the way when I'm making cuts. I don't need to rely on that hook on the fence rail to hold the hose. So I think I'm going to keep using that and upgrade my chip extractor to something else. Please let me know if you have any recommendations for an HVLP extractor. At the moment I'm considering the Axminster AT254SB, which is wall mounted and has the big cartridge style filter for fine dust particles. I can't help but feel that the body of the saw could have been much better designed to allow for more effective dust extraction. Firstly, there are gaps everywhere in the body, which is definitely going to limit the airflow because it's sucking air from all over the place. And secondly, why couldn't the dust port connect directly to the blade housing rather than via a hose to a port at the bottom of the saw? But the reality of the situation is that from the research I've done, that all of the saws that were within my budget when I was looking for a new table saw will probably have the same or similar performance with dust extraction. So it's not something that makes me regret buying this saw, but I am really gutted that I can't run it connected to my main dust extraction setup. The steel tables that are supplied with the saw are surprisingly good quality. Nice thick gauge steel, heavy and solid. You get one extension table and one outfeed table which attaches via these brackets at the back. But I had opted to buy one of the upgrade packages offered by Axminster, which consists of two cast iron extension tables measuring 304mm by 800mm and extended rails for the fence to allow a larger cutting capacity of up to 840mm. The original fence rails that come with the saw as standard allow for rip cuts up to 610mm, and I won't be using those. The extension tables can either be positioned one on either side of the main table or both to one side. I chose one on either side. Ideally, you need two people for fitting these, one holding the table and one to tighten the nuts underneath. Once the nuts are in, it's just a case of trying to get the tables as level as possible with the main table before giving them a final tighten. In future, I plan to use this space at the end of the fence rails to add a router table. That will be a future project on my channel. Another thing to mention here is with the extended rails, there is actually enough space here to add the steel extension table too, if you wanted, in addition to the cast iron extensions. The fence secures to the rails at the front and the back of the saw, and I have to say it's fantastic. I'm very happy with how it operates. It's very solid when it's locked and it's easy to move when it isn't. The fence was at a perfect 90-degree angle to the table right out of the box. I was less impressed with the micro adjuster mechanism. It has a spring in it and you push it forward to engage the rack and pinion teeth on the bottom of the fence rails. Good idea in principle, but doesn't operate as well as it could. The fence unfortunately wasn't parallel to the blade when I got it, and to adjust it you need to loosen these 4 Allen key bolts. You can then level it up and tighten it down. It sounds easy, but actually it's a bit of a pain because when the bolts are tightened it tends to move out of square again, so you need to try and compensate for that movement when setting it. It took me probably 6 or 7 attempts to get it set up nice and true, but now it's set, I hopefully won't ever have to do that again. The fence comes with an adjustable auxiliary fence add-on to make it safer to cut thin workpieces. It bolts directly to the main fence with these thumb screws, and it measures 110mm in width, so you need to account for that extra distance if using the measuring tape on the fence rails. Here you'll see that I'm able to use the auxiliary fence while leaving the crown guard fitted to rip down a small workpiece. The fence can also be flipped, presumably to provide better support when running boards through vertically. Included in the box were 3 adhesive backed measuring tapes, a short one, a longer one, and one which reads backwards from right to left for use on the left hand side of the blade. To add these, I butted the fence up to the blade, slid the measuring tape into the 0 position, peeled off the back and stuck it down. And from there you can then dial it in more accurately using these screws on the Perspex magnification screen. I have to say the measurement marker is one of the biggest disappointments for me. I actually preferred the measuring marker on my old saw, the DeWalt AW10BSB2, which was excellent actually, much easier to read and more accurate to rely upon. I think that the marker on this one is just positioned too far away from the measuring tape, which means there's a high possibility that you won't be able to dial the fence in perfectly unless you're looking down on it from a perfectly plumb angle. There's just too much of a margin for error here in my opinion, and I will probably try to modify this in some way in future. In the meantime though, I actually found that flipping the magnification plate over so that it's the opposite way around to what it's supposed to be seems to be a slight improvement, so that's how I'll use it now until I find a better solution. The blade tilt adjustment works well, but I found that out of the box it wouldn't tilt to a full 45 or 90 degree angle. However, it's really easy to adjust via these stop collars inside the saw. You can dial these into a perfect 90 and 45 degree angle, and then it's very repeatably accurate too, so I'm really happy with that. The saw is fitted with an NVR switch for safety, and it's very sensitive, so you do have to be careful when you drop the hinged lid after turning the saw on, as it will turn off the motor if you drop it with any momentum. The motor on this saw is absolute music to my ears. After working with the noisy brushed motor on the DeWalt DW745 for over 5 years, which is a screamer of a saw that makes you clench your teeth and wince every time you switch it on, this one just purrs like a kitten. I absolutely love that. It's going to be a real pleasure to use. The Mitre Gauge supplied with the saw is definitely a step up in quality to any that I've had before with any other tools. It has preset stops for common angles, and they are fully adjustable too. It also has an extension arm adjustable in length for better workpiece support while using it to make cuts. And it feels heavy, solid and decent enough quality, but does it fit the Mitre slots? Well, no, it doesn't. It certainly fits better than many I've used in the past, but there is still some side-to-side play here. And I also noticed that there seems to be more play in the middle of the saw than there was at the front or the back of the saw. This made me want to take some test measurements to see what was going on here. So here I'm testing the Mitre slot on the right hand side of the blade. 19.17, 19.13, 19.16, 19.21, 19.29, 19.20, 19.15 and 19.17. So as I suspected, the slot is slightly wider in the middle of the table. Now we'll try the same again on the left slot. 19.11, 19.2, 19.3, 19.33, 19.32, 19.28, 19.27, 19.23. So again, this slot is slightly wider in the middle of the table by between 0.1 and 0.2 of a millimeter. You can see at the front of the table here, there's very little side-to-side movement, whereas in the middle, there's quite a bit more movement. But for me, I never use these things anyway. I'm probably going to build a cross-cut sled for this saw at some point, and I don't think a difference of 0.1 or 0.2 millimeters in the width of these slots is going to matter at all for that. One final thing to mention in terms of build quality is that the tables, fence rails and the hose hook all have really sharp edges, to the point where I even cut myself when I hit my hand on the hook, so I ran a file across all of the sharp edges just to ease them over. This is the kind of thing I expect to have to do with tools that are made in China at the lower end of the price point, and personally I'm happy to spend 10 minutes doing this if it keeps the price down. Rather than this kind of hand finishing being done in the factory where they are made, that's fine by me. I also bought the mobile wheelbase for the saw from Axminster, and it's okay, although I was hoping that it would be one of the ones where you can engage the wheels via a foot switch. Instead, on this one you have to manually screw these support legs by hand and then unwind them when you want to move the saw around. Before I summarise whether I'm happy with the saw or not, I just wanted to let you know that I recently joined the Axminster affiliate scheme. That means if you use the link that I've put in the description box below this video to the Axminster website, and if you purchase anything, I will earn a small commission on any sales, which helps to support the YouTube channel. It doesn't cost anything extra to you, the buyer, and it applies to all products as far as I'm aware, not just the ones relating to this table saw. So if you do ever want to buy anything from Axminster, please do use my link. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So am I happy with the Axminster AT254SB? Once you've spent some time setting it up to cut accurately, it really is a pleasure to use and make cuts with. It's definitely a huge step up from using a sight saw. It feels smooth, robust, solid, and with things like the stop collars on the blade tilt adjustment and also the adjustment for squaring up the fence, I have every confidence that it's going to perform really well for me and give me very accurate results. The induction motor has more than enough power for any task I've used it for, so no concerns there, and it's very easy on the ears too. The cast iron tables are good quality and flat to within about 1/10 of a millimeter, which is fine by me, and the fence operates really well and is a joy to use. There are a few silly little minor things that would be really easy to change in order to improve the user experience. For example, that Perspex screen measurement marker could be much better designed, and an insert plate that locks in place using a simple turn screw switch would be a huge improvement rather than individual machine screws that are easily lost. And there are other things that in my opinion could take this saw from being a good budget saw to the next level, like for example quick release riving knife rather than relying on bolts to secure it, and an adjustable height riving knife mechanism. But to be fair, at this price point I think I'm probably asking for too much. Dust extraction was a big disappointment for me, but if you have an HVLP chip extractor rather than an LVHP one like mine, then I expect you'll get much better performance. But I still think that it could be significantly improved by having better air sealing inside the body of the saw and a dust port connected directly to the blade housing. If I could go back in time, would I choose the same saw again? Well, it's difficult to say because I haven't had the opportunity to try out or even look at any of those other saws, but I don't think any of them would outperform this one. Therefore, I am happy with my decision to buy this saw, and once I get a new HVLP dust extractor, I think I'll generally be pretty happy with it. I hope you found this video useful. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more weekly woodworking videos. You can also help support the channel via PayPal, Patreon, or even the Axminster link that I mentioned down below in the description box. On Patreon you can also get early access to my videos, exclusive content, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thank you for watching.